Honor, loyalty, the sword. Few images in world history are as iconic or as misunderstood as the samurai. For centuries, they've been portrayed as flawless warriors living by an unbreakable moral code, guardians of a Japan defined by discipline and dignity. Yet behind the legend lies a far more complex reality. Their story isn't one of simple honor, but of ambition and conflict, of shifting loyalties, of political intrigue, and of a nation struggling to define itself across 1,000 years. This is the story of how a small class of provincial fighters rose to rule Japan, and how an unstoppable tide of change eventually swept them into the past. Our journey begins not in the chaos of war, but in the quiet elegance of the Heian period, which lasted from the late 8th to the late 12th century. Kyoto, the imperial capital, was a world obsessed with refinement palaces filled with poets, musicians, and scholars. Court nobles spent their days composing delicate verses, admiring seasonal flowers, and perfecting the rituals of aristocratic life. Yet while the capital floated in its world of ceremony and beauty, the countryside was slipping into unrest. Banditry grew, local disputes flared into violence, and the central government, distant and preoccupied with culture, lacked the power to maintain order across its vast territories. In the far provinces, powerful families began hiring their own private protectors, skilled warriors who lived on remote estates. These early fighters were known as bushi, men who trained to defend land and lord with absolute loyalty. They were horsemen first, archers second, and swordsmen third. Their primary weapon was the bow, and their battlefield skill lay in the elegance and precision of mounted archery. They fought in small units, calling out their lineage before combat, seeking honorable duels under the open sky. Over time, two great warrior houses rose above all others, the Minamoto and the Taira. Their rivalry simmered beneath the surface of Japanese politics for generations, gathering strength like a storm waiting to break. That storm arrived in the late 12th century with the Genpei War, a brutal conflict that became the first great clash of samurai history. The Taira, who had grown powerful within the imperial court, faced off against the Minamoto, who commanded vast networks of provincial warriors. The war lasted 5 years and covered mountains, plains, rivers, and seas. Battles were fought on horseback, in narrow valleys, on burning ships, and across freezing terrain. Samurai recorded their deeds in epic tales, acts of bravery, loyalty, tragedy, and betrayal. When the final battle came at Dan-no-ura in 1185, the Minamoto emerged victorious. And their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, seized a power no warrior had ever held before. In 1192 he was appointed shogun, the supreme military commander of Japan. For the first time, real authority shifted away from the emperor and into the hands of a warrior. This moment marks the beginning of the Kamakura shogunate, and with it, the dawn of the samurai age. But this new era was immediately tested by an enemy unlike any Japan had ever seen: the Mongols. In 1274 and again in 1281, the armies of Kublai Khan launched massive invasions. Samurai who had once fought elegant duels suddenly faced Mongol infantry who fought in overwhelming formations, used explosives, and employed tactics unfamiliar to Japan. The battles were brutal, chaotic, and terrifying. And twice, immense typhoons swept through the Mongol fleets, smashing their ships and saving Japan from conquest. These storms were remembered as kamikaze, the divine winds. Yet while the Mongols failed, the cost of defending the country strained the shogunate financially and politically. Over time, the Kamakura government weakened and internal unrest grew. The collapse that followed plunged Japan into division once again. A new military government, the Ashikaga shogunate, took power, but it struggled to maintain unity. Local lords, the daimyo, became increasingly independent, governing their territories like small kingdoms. By the mid-15th century, Japan fell into a century-long conflict, known as the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States. It was a time when alliances shifted overnight, betrayals were commonplace, and entire clans were wiped out in battles that stretched across valleys and mountains. Yet, even in this darkness, a strange and striking cultural beauty flourished. Zen Buddhism shaped the warrior spirit, emphasizing self-discipline, meditation, and clarity of mind. The tea ceremony became a symbol of harmony and simplicity. No theater developed its slow, haunting form. Painters created serene landscapes that contrasted sharply with the violence of the era. The samurai lived between extremes. Moments of peace refined into art, moments of war defined by sudden and violent struggle. From this age of chaos emerged three leaders whose vision and determination would reshape Japan. Oda Nobunaga, a brilliant and ruthless tactician, embraced firearms at a scale never seen before. He shattered ancient armies and broke the power of old institutions. After him came Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man born a peasant who rose through talent and cunning to unify almost all of Japan. Hideyoshi froze the social hierarchy, defining the samurai as the permanent warrior class and forbidding commoners from bearing arms. Finally, after Hideyoshi's death, Tokugawa Ieyasu seized victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. 3 years later, he became shogun, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for more than 250 years. Under Tokugawa rule, Japan entered the long peace of the Edo period. It was a time of stability, growth, and prosperity. Cities flourished, roads connected the nation, education spread. But for the samurai, peace brought a profound transformation. With no wars left to fight, their swords remained ceremonial. Many became administrators, teachers, and bureaucrats, serving their daimyo with ink and paper instead of armor and steel. Their income came in stipends, not spoils, and their role shifted from warriors to scholars and moral exemplars. It was during this time that Bushido, the way of the warrior, took form as a philosophical ideal, one that emphasized loyalty, frugality, discipline, and the acceptance of death. The samurai of the Edo period were not the fierce fighters of legend but the refined, educated elite of a peaceful society. But peace, once stable, began to crack. In 1853, American warships under Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Edo Bay. Their guns, their steam power, and their unmistakable message forced Japan to confront a reality it could no longer ignore. The world had changed, and Japan had to change with it. Unequal treaties followed, weakening the shogunate and dividing the country between those who sought modernization and those who wanted to defend old traditions. Samurai across the nation rallied behind the slogan, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians." The conflict grew until open rebellion erupted. In 1868, the Tokugawa shogunate fell. The Meiji Restoration restored power to the emperor and began a sweeping transformation of Japanese society. Western technologies, modern education, new laws, and an industrial economy rapidly emerged. Railways spread across the land, modern factories filled growing cities. And the creation of a national conscript army meant the warrior class was no longer needed. The samurai lost their stipends, their privileges, their political power, and eventually, even the right to carry swords in public. A tradition that had dominated Japanese life for nearly 7 centuries was being dismantled piece by piece. For many former samurai, the change was unbearable. Their identity, purpose, and honor had been tied to their role as warriors, and now that world had vanished. In 1877, the tension exploded into the Satsuma Rebellion. Led by Seigo Takamori, man often remembered as the last true samurai. Saigo and his followers, armed mostly with swords, faced a modern imperial army equipped with rifles, artillery, and Western tactics. The rebellion ended in tragedy at the Battle of Shiroyama, where Saigo Ryo's small force was surrounded and destroyed. His death symbolized the final curtain falling on the samurai age. Yet even as the warriors themselves faded into history, their legacy endured. The values they refined over centuries, discipline, loyalty, self-mastery, devotion to duty, became deeply woven into Japanese identity. Their aesthetics shaped literature, art, and philosophy. Their spirit influenced martial arts traditions and modern corporate culture. And despite the myths, the embellishments, and the romantic retellings, the real story of the samurai remains far more powerful than the legend. It is a story of a society transformed across time, of warriors who evolved from horse archers to administrators, from deadly fighters to philosophical icons. The samurai may no longer walk the world with swords at their sides, but their presence is still felt in the quiet discipline of a dojo, in the moral language of respect and duty, and in the cultural memory of a people who once lived through centuries of conflict, order, and transformation. The age of the samurai has ended, but their shadow continues to shape Japan to this day. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more journeys into history.